team that we have here in the project. So my name is Tane Casserly. I'm with NOAA's Monitor National Marine Sanctuary. I'm an archaeologist and historian. I'm so happy to be bringing this story to you about our nation's maritime heritage off the coast of North Carolina. The project is the Valor in the Atlantic Telepresence Project. We are right now on the shipwreck of the Malchace, a World War II freighter that actually sank in 1942. And it was actually sunk on April 9th by the U-160 by 2 torpedo hits on the port side. So we're slowly approaching the wreck, but we've got several experts with us on the ship and online. This project is a cooperative agreement between NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries and the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration. On board right now is one of our partners. We have Chris Sutherly, State Underwater Archaeologist with North Carolina's Office of State Archaeology. We also have Dr. Avery Paxton and Dr. Chris Taylor from NOAA's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, as well as some other experts. And we're very proud to be partnering with the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration that has made all of this possible with their cutting-edge ROV technology, their pilots, and of course the satellite capability. Let me pass it to Dan. Dan, can you tell us a little bit more about GFOE and the incredible work that you've done to make this possible?
Yeah, thanks, Tane. And yeah, we're very proud of this partnership and the fact that we're able to bring this ROV and telepresence capability to this area. This region is just rich and full of cultural and historical and ecological significance. And so GFOE, the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration, is a nonprofit engineering group that's based in Mystic, Connecticut, and has a ROV engineering workshop in Rhode Island. The total team is made up of about 25 to 30 people of different expertises and backgrounds. But on board today, we have about 10 of us, a mix of mechanical, electrical, data and software engineers, video engineers, and satellite communications specialists. And so basically, this system does not live on the NOAA ship Nancy Foster. It's actually all designed, built, and assembled in the workshop in Rhode Island. And when it was time to mobilize for this expedition, we put all that equipment on a flatbed truck, sent it down to Charleston to meet the ship for mobilization. And so we brought all this equipment on board and then installed it for this expedition. And at the end of the expedition, we'll pack it all up and send it back to Rhode Island. But the group manages everything from the ROVs that you're seeing on the bottom of the seafloor right now, all the way through the satellite communications technology. There's a satellite tracking dish on board that we're using to send this live footage to you. And I'll just note that the footage that you're seeing is coming from the bottom of the seafloor with only a 5 to 8 second delay. So the video signal is coming through the main ROV's camera, up through a cable in the ship, through our satellite tracking dish, up through satellites in space, back down to shore, and being broadcast through YouTube, all in less than 8 seconds. And we're very proud to be here and working with you on this.
Yeah, it's incredible, just to be able to partner with a group like GFOE to bring this live exploration to you. We've, at NOAA's Monitor National Marine Sanctuary, in the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries with NOAA, we have looked at several of these shipwreck sites over the years, our World War I heritage, our World War II heritage, and of course, the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary that protects only the USS Monitor, this kind of Civil War ironclad, but we partner with other federal and state institutions to help document and honor and celebrate our nation's maritime heritage, and that's why we're here today. As we look around, and I think also, Avery, that you have some additional experts on the line too, helping with our story we're telling with the ecology. Would you please introduce them?
Sure. We also have on the line today from the NOAA National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science a ecologist named Mike Bolinger, and Mike is a expert at underwater imaging and habitat mapping methods. So we're really excited to have him on board today. He has co-led some of our team's recent research on shipwrecks and artificial reefs off the coast of North Carolina. So really excited to have him weigh in.
Yeah, wonderful. And as we're sitting here, we're just getting orientated. Maybe I'll toss it over to Chris Sutherly. Chris, we partner with you a lot, and we've got a long history of partnering with the North Carolina Office of State Archaeology, and that all began back in the early 1970s with the discovery and documentation of Monitor. But as we're out here with you, looking at North Carolina's maritime heritage and this war-related casualty, what does this mean to you?
I'm going to say yes, Tane. This is just such a big cultural story for the people in North Carolina. Not a lot of people realize how close the battle and the conflict with World War II came to the U.S., came to North Carolina. We're 20 or so miles offshore, and the German U-boats in the early 40s came a lot closer than that. And this is as it's been termed, the Battle of the Atlantic, where most of the conflict took place in the seas along the North Carolina coast, with the shipping going up and down. And this is just a tremendous story for the maritime history and the maritime heritage that we have in North Carolina, and especially acknowledging the merchant mariners of the day that put their lives at risk, very much so, carrying the cargoes for the Allied war effort.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Chris. And NOAA and the Office of National Marine Sanctuary is very proud to partner with folks like the North Carolina Office of Archaeology to help tell the story and to provide data to help them manage their resources. And I should point out that what you see on the screens now is it looks like an arm that's extended with a box that has these sort of bubble spheres coming off it. That's actually a Boxfish 360 camera. So that's one of the incredible innovations that the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration is bringing to this project. It actually has a video camera inside it with 3 lenses, which after the project is done, we'll be able to splice together to create sort of a virtual reality tour of the shipwreck. So it's just another way that we can sort of immerse you and bring this history to you, where you could download this video to your computer, or even better, download it to a pair of sort of virtual reality headsets, and you'll feel like you're actually free swimming and be able to look anywhere as you explore the space. So please look for that product from us in the future. But again, some of that incredible technology. And maybe for our ecologists on the phone, we're starting to see some marine life. Maybe you can help describe what we're seeing.
Hey folks, Chris Taylor here again. I'm making out mostly jacks in the field of view, but on feed 2, there's a real cool footage of the imaging sonar that the ROV has installed too. This is like an acoustic camera that's able to look out tens of meters. It looks like they're imaging out about 30 meters from the ROV, and that gives them a really good way to look way ahead of beyond where the camera can see, and it gives them an indication that they're approaching the wreck, which you can now see coming into view here. Barracuda's coming across the feed 1 from left to right. And I'm seeing some smaller fish, and I'm hoping that we'll get closer and get some positive IDs on those smaller fish up close to the wreck. The footage from the imaging sonar is really, really cool if you're able to see feed 2.
Thanks, Chris. One of the things that we notice on a lot of these shipwrecks is that oftentimes we do see a lot of tropical and subtropical fish species that prefer warmer water conditions. And that's a perfect segue to a question that we have in the chat, which is, what is the water temperature down there? Dan and ROV pilots, are you all able to provide information on the water temperature that the ROV is currently experiencing at depth?
Yeah, thanks, Avery. I was just speaking with the pilots. So Yogi does have a temperature probe on board, and we're able to track real-time temperature of the water surrounding the vehicle. Right now, it's reading about 24 degrees Celsius. And so, we will be monitoring that throughout the dive. It's also, part of a data package that we're recording on a separate sensor called a CTD, or a conductivity temperature and depth sensor. And all of this is going to be made available for science following the cruise. It's all recorded.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I should point out that joining us as well is Joe Schwartzer. He is the director of the North Carolina Maritime System. And Joe, thank you for joining us again today.
Oh, delighted tonight. Great footage as usual. Looks good.
Good. Well, thank you, sir, for being here. The North Carolina Maritime Museum System is a fantastic resource for coastal North Carolina, telling that maritime story of wars and colonies and Battle of the Atlantic, and of course the Monitor. So we're very proud to have you on the phone today.
Proud to be part of the team. This is great.
You know, and if we look at what we're seeing on the screen, you'll notice if you've been tuning in for the last few days that we were on a World War II tanker, the E.M. Clark, a few days ago. Bit deeper water. That was at 260 feet. We're actually at 205 feet today. But you notice the wrecks are very different. One of those is a little bit might be the shallower depth, of course, 60 feet less. But also, this what we see the wreck site really sort of looks like it's been blown apart and lower to the seafloor, speaks to the violence of the sinking event. You know, when it was attacked in the early morning hours of April 9th, 1942 by the U-160, it was struck by a torpedo on the port side, just forward of the number 4 hold. The captain ordered all engines stopped, and while the crew was trying to figure out what the damage was, another torpedo slammed into the side just behind the number 3 hold, which blew a gigantic hole in the bulkhead, and the engine room quickly flooded, and the ship went up in flames and went down. So, you know, we really talk about the violence of war. That's what we're seeing here, and that's why there's a really big difference between the World War II freighter we're seeing here now, sort of looks like it's laying down on the seafloor, versus the more intact one we saw yesterday, which didn't have such a violent sinking event.
I would imagine that its cargo of caustic soda and caustic ash contributed to the devastation, because the fire would have been significant.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So, you know, this is really the first time that we've had this type of technology on this shipwreck. So, you know, maybe if everybody keeps their eyes out for, you know, we can see damage from burning, maybe some melting metal, and also maybe if there's remnants of that soda ash, perhaps still here on the seafloor, if we keep our eyes out for that.
Yeah, Tony, as we get close to the wreck here, we look down towards the seabed. We're seeing a number of different species, different from the pelagic or the water column species that we encountered as we were approaching the wreck, those jacks, barracuda. We just saw a grouper swim past the camera and go underneath the wreck, and that's really common. They're going to find refuge in a variety of these crevices. There's a lot of complexity to this wreck as it sits on the seafloor, like you said, basically in many, many pieces. And I'm looking forward to getting down closer to the wreck and be able to get some of that, some of the identifications. I want to point out we have other ecologist on the line here, Brian Deegan, who's our dive supervisor, dive master, and has been leading our dive program for a number of years. He's also conducted a number of technical diving surveys off of the coast here. Brian, have you been diving on this particular wreck, and maybe can you comment on some of the fish that you're seeing?
Maybe as we wait for Brian, I just point out the ROV pilots are sort of just experimenting with the best lighting. You know, there's so much technology that's been brought to the seafloor here. We're trying to find the best way to image and get the best color we can on the bottom. But yeah, as we move forward, and then as we start moving towards the right of the vessel, as the ROV is moving now, we'll see a bit more structure and a bit more relief too, which will be pretty interesting. But what we're looking at now is essentially the sides of the hull, and sort of curving off to the left-hand side of the screen, which is curving towards the turn of the hull, which would be the bottom. And is Brian on, Chris?
He might have stepped off for other duties, but that was the Scamp that just went by there. The Scamp is a larger bodied grouper that very sought after by the fishermen, and its characteristic is the sort of broom-shaped tail. So many of the groupers will have sort of a flat end to their tail, and the Scamp have a tail that has sort of wispy edges to it, what we call sort of a broom edge, and that's a very characteristic of that species.
Yeah, fantastic.
And so I'd like to ask
a barjack in the upper right.
Oh, there's quite a bit of marine life we're seeing now on these screens.
Yeah, I'm curious what one of our other NOAA ecologists who's on the line, Mike Bolinger, makes of this. Mike, can you share with us some of your observations and what you think about this diversity of marine life that we're seeing so far in the first few minutes of this dive?
Sure. The we're seeing a lot of the almaco jack that Chris pointed out earlier, the bigger pelagic species that will start to eat some of the smaller forage fish. But we're seeing a little bit less diversity than, at least initially, than we saw in the E.M. Clark the other day. This seems to be a little bit different of a wreck. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit less vertical relief, and I would suppose, at least from these first glances, that that's what's driving it. I'm looking forward to, like Chris said, getting closer to the wreck and seeing what's up close and looking at some of the benthic invertebrates and stuff like that.
Thanks so much, Mike. And you and Chris have both hit on a really important point that oftentimes the structures that rise higher or taller off of the seafloor are going to have more fish or a greater variety of fish on them. So I think it's really interesting, like you hit upon, to compare today's wreck, which is broken up into many pieces and doesn't rise as far off the seafloor, to the ones we visited in the past few days that did rise a little bit further up into the water column. And so, Tane, I'm curious from your perspective, what using a tool like a remotely operated vehicle that can give us unlimited bottom time brings to the field.
Well, I think it's a game changer for a lot of these shipwreck sites. They're deep. This is a 205-foot site on the seafloor. This is a deep dive. It's a technical dive. Takes a lot of training, equipment, and there's a decompression obligation, which means you can't just come right up to the surface, right? You've got to slowly come up and a limited bottom time too. Sometimes, it could be half an hour or so, but that's it. But, using this technology, we could literally stare at one feature, like a 1 meter grid, for 8 hours straight to really get those observations. So I know for us, to really kind of pinpoint maybe what happened to a vessel that went down, oftentimes it's almost, think of it like a crime scene, right? So you're looking at like, how, what happened to this? What vessel is this? How did it go down? It gives us that time on the bottom to really explore and take our time. And, I think for the ecologists, Avery, what is this for you guys where you could really just park the ROV and make those observations?
Right, so I think it's very complementary to what you've described. So our focus is on understanding how fish are using these shipwrecks for their homes, but also in understanding how a variety of plants and animals actually will grow on the structure of the shipwreck too. And so for us, being able to spend more time underwater, get eyes underwater using tools like remotely operated vehicles is very valuable. And one of the things our group does is we try to understand how the types of fish that we see and other marine life on these shipwrecks may change over time. And so historically, over the past multiple decades, the NOAA team has been able to make observations of what types of fish are on some of the wrecks like the Malchace. And so we can use these series of observations over time to get a better understanding of what may be happening for the habitat value. And Chris Taylor, I'm hoping you can share a little bit more about how we try to understand these wrecks, but also how these wrecks are features in a broader seascape, a landscape of other structured seafloor habitats.
Yeah, thanks, Avery. And I'm just going to keep bouncing back and forth. My eyes keep bouncing back and forth between feed 1 and feed 2. And I think what we're able to do with this ROV footage and the number of cameras that we have on the system is make some really interesting observations about the fish behavior around these different wreck features. Feed 2, you'll see the broad camera view. So not only are we zooming in and we're getting an up-close view of the species that are occupying the wreck, but if you look at the top 2 feeds in feed 2, we're seeing the shape of the school as they swim around. And these are, I'm guessing they're amberjack or almaco jack, and we'll encounter the schooling species like that. And we're able to make some counts of those species because we're capturing the video footage here, but we're also able to make estimates of the abundance of those fish using our echo sounders from either the imaging sonar on the ROV or from the sonars that are mounted to the ship. That's shown us that these wrecks hold an abundance of marine life and behave in some ways like the rocky reefs that are also abundant off of our coast. But a good bit of our coastal ocean is made of sand, and that means it's got very little structure to it or maybe some waves to it. but then you come upon a wreck site like this that may be a very discrete feature like the Malchace. 2 days ago, we visited the Ian Clark, which is a 500-foot wreck feature that's very high in the water column. So there are a variety of shapes and sizes that in some ways mimic the complex reef structure that we see on the rocky reefs. And so we've conducted numerous studies to make those comparisons. But the unique aspect of the wrecks is that they really are isolated like islands or oases as compared to the rocky reefs that sometimes extend for kilometers as ridges or ledges. And so the very isolated feature of this wreck makes it really interesting for us to study. Sometimes we'll encounter a higher biomass of fish per unit area on these shipwrecks as compared to the rocky reefs, and we're still trying to put that story together. Coming into the field of view, we've got a school of spadefish. Actually, so those must have been spadefish in the distance. I keep forgetting that our echosounder will pick up spadefish schools as sort of pyramids and triangles on the echogram, and I missed that in the distant view from the ROV, but it's really interesting to watch them sort of behave around the ROV, come up and check it out. They're a little bit curious, and I'm also seeing a school of smaller fish close to the wreck, and I'm not sure if I can make those out. So maybe Brian got an eye on them while I was gabbing here. I'll pause and we'll try to get some IDs going.
Yeah, and so for those watching, the spadefish that Chris identified, they have a distinctive shape. They are shaped like the spade suit that you would see on your playing cards, and they also have black vertical bands along their body. We're also looking at a Scamp Grouper, Scamp, S-C-A-M-P, at the bottom of my screen right now, right bottom center. And I think I may have seen a lionfish earlier. I'll point that back out if we see that type of fish again.
Yeah, I definitely saw a lionfish on that one.
Oh, actually.
There are a number of lionfish down towards the bottom of the screen on feed 1.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah,
bottom right now.
Down.
Connie, I've got a question. It's based on the sinking reports. The destruction of this hull is far more extensive than you would have thought from the description of the attack and the subsequent sinking. She settled slowly from her stern. Do you think this could be the result of later in the war having this thing mistaken as a submerged U-boat? They dropped depth charges on it because this has really been torn apart.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. This is I'm speaking to Joe Schwartzer, the director for the North Carolina Maritime Museum System, and yeah, absolutely, Joe. I was just thinking as we're going over it, the amount of sheer destruction that we're seeing here. I mean, there's sort of folded, melted metal, the whole torn apart, but there's additional, almost like fragments, like it's been blasted too. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there were rumors that the Allies and the U.S. Navy did depth charge these metal objects on the bottom that could possibly be U-boats. It is approximately the same shape and might have the same signature. So perhaps better safe than sorry. I'll also note from maybe a construction standpoint, this vessel was built actually in the 20s. Actually in, I believe, 1921, 1920 in Jacksonville, Florida. And maybe the folks who are watching can help us, but it looks like what I saw were rivets and riveted construction versus welding, which, we think of ships being welded, but that's really more of a modern phenomena that really came into being towards World War II, not always, but maybe more prevalently. And for me, I think I've seen quite a bit of riveted construction here, which is the same type of construction that the USS Monitor had. And maybe Chris Southerly, are you seeing that same type of thing? Have you seen rivets yet? Riveted construction on this ship?
Yeah. I guess say yeah, Tony. I've noticed definitely seems to be a primarily riveted construction and not any welding that of any particular note. It may also be a consideration too when we were looking at the E.M. Clark. It sank very quickly and was substantially larger, almost 500 feet long, and sits in we have 260 or so feet of water there, as opposed to just over 200 here, and the Malchace was only a little over 330 feet long. If it had a bit more violent sinking, this shallower depth could also expose it more to some of the hurricanes that have passed
They're
through
the
here
boilers.
over the last few hundred years, or last 60 or so years, rather.
Yeah,
To
absolutely.
continue to break the structure apart.
Yeah, it's incredible. And if we look on the screens here, what we're seeing, folks, are the vessel's boilers. So these, of course, this is what helped power the engines. And maybe Drew Schwartz, I know you were just about to say something, but maybe you could help us describe these boilers, what you're seeing.
No, I was just saying it was certainly the boiler. This ship has really been torn apart. This is very interesting to see this.
Yeah, it is. And if we're seeing, like the folks at home, when you're watching, you see what looks like the metal sort of draped over itself. That's from the superheating of the hull when it burned. And then you'll also see it looks like it's almost been blasted, too. So it just speaks to some of the tremendous heat that occurred when this vessel was hit by 2 torpedoes back in 1942. And we've got Lars on the... excuse me. Yep.
You go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say we also have Lars from GFOE joining us here on the mic. Lars, you're ROV pilot and engineer, but what's it like seeing some of this World War II heritage on the seafloor?
How's it going? My name's Lars Murphy. Normally sitting in the front row, and now I've moved to the back row here with Hane. And for us, it's fascinating. We spend a lot of time at the bottom of the ocean. We do a lot of deep water exploration with GFOE. And our main vehicles, V2 and Sirius, and to be able to bring out the dual system of Yogi and Guru and be able to dive out here in the Graveyard Atlantic is an amazing experience for us. To be able to offer this technology to capture and collect all of this data to be brought back and shared with the general population, it allows us to bring what we get to do every day. This is our job. We get to see all this and be able to pass it along to folks anywhere in the world that have internet connection. So it's really gratifying to be able to pass along this information, as well as to bring scientists like yourself and archaeologists out here and be able to have the amount of bottom time that we're able to collect for you guys to learn more about what it is that you're studying. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, scientists like myself really enjoy the expertise you bring here. Avery, I'm sorry, you're about to say something?
I was going to introduce another special guest that we have on the line, Paula Whitfield, who is an ecologist with NOAA National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science. Paula has for decades led surveys of reef fish communities on both natural rocky reefs in the area as well as shipwrecks. And I know Paula has been diving, scuba diving, scientific diving, on this particular shipwreck. So Paula, I'm hoping you can share with us some of your previous observations and how that may be similar or different to what you're seeing today.
Yeah, thanks, Avery. I really appreciate that you guys are doing this because it's like a trip down memory lane to think that we're actually on the Malchace right now, which, for a diver from Beaufort, North Carolina, that's like a 4-hour boat ride or something. I could be exaggerating, but it's a really long boat ride to get all the way around Cape Lookout Shoals to get up to the Malchace. But it was one of those places that you get to go to rarely. And I was thinking as we were first, watching the ship laid out, it's very characteristic of a lot of the wrecks offshore, obviously, that it's broken up. But I thought this one I had remembered, because we're talking 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. But I felt like it was more intact than I remembered, than it is now. And I'm still not sure we've seen the engine. Like, finally, so now we're on the boilers, but I thought maybe the engine was, like, right beyond that. But I just remember there being a lot more superstructure. And I wonder if Brian Deegan or somebody else, Tane, remembers, that as well. But that's just an observation I had.
Hey, Paul, it's great to hear you. This is Brian Deegan. I'll second your comment there. Yeah, our dives that we did on this wreck, I believe was 12 years ago or so, and I'll concur. There was a lot more up in the water column than there is now that I'm seeing. I remember a slightly different wreck. So I'm wondering if perhaps some of our storms that have hit the coast over the years have had their effect here.
Yeah, what?
You know, that's what I would be thinking. And but I just want to add that the depth of this, it surprises me that the storms would be having that much of an effect in this depth. So that was my final comment on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so, Paulo, while we have you on the line, we've seen several fish that, for those who are able to get a close-up glimpse, look kind of exotic and alien, and these are fish called lionfish. Paulo, I'm wondering if you can help our viewers learn how to identify a lionfish and why we might be seeing those, so a little bit of background on the invasive species.
Sure. I mean, lionfish are an invasive species. They're native to the Indo-Pacific, and they were released, hopefully accidentally, through the aquarium chain off Florida, and they're considered venomous species. And I was thinking, if you want to be able to ID a lionfish, you got to watch that movie. I think it's Naked Gun 3.5 or whatever. But there's a scene where there's a lionfish scene in that movie, and I'm joking, obviously, but lionfish are just probably one of the easiest, most charismatic fish to ID that you can possibly imagine. And I actually don't see one on the screen right now, and I'm very surprised because yesterday, God, the Clark was just, I used to say as a North Carolinian, eat up with them, They were just everywhere. But anyway, yeah, they got to we saw them first in the year 2000, and then they just spread like wildfire on the wrecks here, of course, but then southward through the Caribbean, Bahamas, Gulf of Mexico. So
yeah,
that's that, I think.
So we're seeing that the two boilers from the vessel, again, that help provided the power for the engine. So maybe we keep our eyes out if we can actually find the engine itself, which should be here, but we haven't seen it. And Paula, maybe on one of the feeds there's a lionfish now by the boiler, close in.
Oh, okay. So the one below, the Valor C2. One. I see. It's pretty hard. It's pretty cryptic, but yeah, maybe I'm just having trouble with, my vision or something.
Well, maybe
the vision isn't as good, right? The vision isn't as good as on the Clark.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask maybe the ROV pilots.
Yeah,
are we able to
get the camera to turn up the light a little bit on feed one?
Yeah, the ROV pilots. Are we able to turn on the lights just a little bit to throw some light to illuminate? It's a little bit difficult because we have got the boxfish extended about 7 feet out from the ROV, but we can come around. Ah. Okay, roger that.
Well, there's certainly some rivets in the boilers.
Yeah, so this Boxfish 360 camera is going to give us an unprecedented experience after the project that we can share with the public, where it'll make you feel like you're physically there, like you are the camera swimming around this environment. You have the fish swirling around you and things, so stay tuned for that. So maybe let's take note that we'll come back here after we bring the Boxfish back into the ROV, and we can throw some light on these portions of the vessel.
And this is Paula. I just wanted to point out that those sea whips that we were seeing on the boilers, and I remember yesterday, and maybe you guys figured it out, but apparently that's like a species of black coral. Like Steve Giddings ID'd it. Maybe you guys already knew that, yeah. But that was news to me.
No, thanks for that, Paula. I'm trying to make out the species here. I think I'm seeing schoolmasters and a yellow-tailed snapper, maybe. It's hard for me to make them out there. They're a little small, still a little bit far away from the camera, but
there's got to be a few tomtates in there.
Right?
I'm gonna make the educated guess that it might be yellow goatfish. Actually, looking at their schooling behavior.
Whoa.
I know. Looking at the depth, that's a maybe, but it's hard to differentiate. But yeah, definitely some yellow, and seeing where the yellow is occurring on the body, I'm going to go yellow goat.
And
that's what I thought too, Brian.
Brilliant snapper and tomtates in those mixed schools that we're seeing swimming around too. The sort of more silvery, less yellow.
Yeah, along with that, every now and then I'm catching a very elegant fish that maybe some of you can pick out. I don't see it on the screen now, but it's a jackknife. They're a type of drum, and they'll kind of, it looks like almost like they're slithering like an eel, but they're kind of triangular shape up front with a very elongated tail, kind of white with black throughout the body.
Yeah, you don't
maybe
see those.
we get one up close.
Oh. And you only see those like in really tropical water. Like you don't really see those inshore, like less than 100 feet or anything like that. At least that was, I think, my observation.
I'd like to point out what we're seeing here too, structure-wise in the distance. It looks like actually the bottom of the hull, the lower hull, it looks like the long straight line that's protruding there is the keel of the vessel. So it shows how the shipwreck is actually sort of twisted, blown apart, and that's actually a section of the hull that's actually upside down that we see in the distance there beyond the Boxfish. Yeah.
No, Tony, it was actually shot by 2 torpedoes, is that correct? I believe there was one initial one,
Yeah.
and then...
2 torpedoes, yeah.
Yeah, both on the port side, and hit it very hard. And again, like, as Joe Schwartzer pointed out, that maybe the cargo of that soda ash, if that ignited, that would be really sort of caustic and add to the heat and the melting that we're seeing on the site too. And here's a great view again of that lower hull. Those of you who know your ship construction from the early steel days to the sailing days to modern ships, you've got to have a keel if you want to track straight. So that's a great example of that upside down on the seafloor. And we have a shark, it looks like, swimming above it.
Yeah, a little bit too far away. Brian, did you catch that shark, or Paula?
Tough view going away. A little difficult. Nice view of the lionfish there, though.
You know what, though? Like, initially, it did not look like a sand tiger. I was like, is it not a sand tiger?
No, not moving right. Not swimming correct.
Yeah.
It's moving too fast.
Yeah.
Do you all think it could have been a sandbar shark?
That was my initial gut reaction, but I wasn't certain because of the direction it was moving. It had pretty high dorsal, though.
So the view we have now is very interesting because it gets to the point we were talking about earlier, that these shipwrecks, when they come to their final resting place, not only form home for a diversity of fish species, but also for animals that grow on the structure. So Paula has pointed out those sea whips, those black corals, and then just a second ago, the ROV was closer, and we were starting to make out some kind of feathery, bushy organisms that are growing on the structure, likely hydroids or bryozoans. But hopefully we'll get a better glimpse later and can make some IDs on those. And so, Tani, we've been focusing a lot on the ecology and how we can use repeated visits to shipwrecks and videos like this or diver observations to understand changes over time. What are you able to learn from dives like this, and are you able to compare the information we're getting today from previous surveys, perhaps, of this shipwreck?
Yeah, well, it's a great point. So, as a few of us have mentioned, we dove this site, but, several years ago. For me, it was, to be honest, almost 2 decades ago. So we're using our mental memories, maybe scant photographs, but now with modern technology, able to use sort of those sonar views, the multi-beams, which gives you that 3D representation. Side scan, which gives you a 2D representation, but by just running that equipment over the site, you're able to get a snapshot in time of what's happening, but nothing like we're getting now, where this is a true snapshot, eyes on the bottom. So it's incredible. But for us, learning about, how is the shipwreck faring over the years, and maybe one of the greatest threats that we have right now is, from increasing climate change, increasing storms, and how are they affecting these shipwrecks? Naturally they are going to sort of degrade and fall apart, come to equilibrium on the seafloor, but the storms and the energy from the storms really accelerate that. And maybe for Chris Etherly, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the site formation process that we use and study to help us tell the story of the shipwreck and its life.
I guess they absolutely. And yeah, the modern technology with the digital remote sensing, with the multi-beam, the side scan sonar, combined with this technology for imaging, is invaluable from the management standpoint of monitoring and managing these shipwrecks for their preservation to look at the degradation over time and to look at how they are degrading, whether it's storm activity or something else that's going on. And just it's really interesting as we're going through here from your all's recollection of it having a lot more structure or upright structure and being more intact a decade or so ago. And the same thing looking at the multi-beam image from like 2010 or maybe it was 2016 when Nancy Foster was out here once before and got the good multi-beam image that we were using or have been using as a reference by the pilots. Looks to be a lot more intact in that image than what we're seeing here. So I would be inclined to think that the increased storm activity that we have seen has taken its toll on the wreck here and started to continue to tear it apart.
Yeah, we will conduct another multi-beam survey of the vessel after we're done today. And it'll be, that's great. Again, snapshots in time. We'll do it today. We'll look at it 2016, and that'll help tell the story how this is changing over time. But to be able to get that snapshot very quickly, Avery, is critical. And I'm sure the same for you guys using this technology to study how the fish are using this as a habitat. Going back again and again can help tell you guys a real story, too.
Yeah, and I think we have the perfect person on the line to help answer that question. Mike Bolinger leads a lot of imaging. And Mike, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how you can use images taken over time, really detailed images, to learn more about habitats like these shipwrecks.
Sure. Thanks, Avery. Yeah, we can use a technique called photogrammetry that involves taking thousands and thousands of downward-facing photos. Us, biologists, and the archaeologists both use this technique, different reasons, but we're looking at structure and the fish's reaction to the structure. And the archaeologists, like Tane and other folks on the phone, are looking at like the structure itself. And they can elaborate more about that, but basically, photogrammetry that we use is taking downward-facing photos and stitching them all together and we can create a three-dimensional model based on all these angles that we can see from all these downward-looking photographs. And we can create large photo mosaics. We can create the 3D models. We can analyze those. If we take multiple over different years, we can analyze those different 3D models, put them on top of each other, and look at changes throughout time. It's very, very cool. It's a very new technique in the grand scheme of monitoring techniques, but it's one that we have in our arsenal as well. We need visibility like we have today that looks pretty phenomenal. And the other day on the EM Clark, that type of visibility, if we have less than 10 feet of visibility, when you can't really see anything, you can't really take photos. But that's one of the tools in our arsenal.
Well, and I should point out that's actually a big part of what's going to be happening on this project, where we actually have Thor can tell us a little bit about how GFOE is going to create these photogrammetry models for us during the Valor of the Atlantic project.
Sure. What's quite interesting about this whole situation is you all have dove on the site before, and the technology that you used at the time was cutting edge. You brought down the technology that would allow you to get as much as you can out of the limited ability of time that you had on the wreck itself. And as time progresses, we increase that technology, and even though we're coming back to the same site, we're continuously gathering more and more information about what's down here, going from just pictures that you might have been able to take or short videos while you're scuba diving, to now bringing down the ROV cameras, to using the sonar imaging that we can use in the bathymetry maps to map it over time, the changes that are down there, to doing the photo mosaic, as you just mentioned. So what we'll be doing for that is using the same cameras that are on our vehicle, setting them at a specific setting, setting the lights just right, and then what we like to call mowing the lawn pattern, where you're pretty much running lines straight up and down with a slight overlap on each of the paths that we take. Then afterwards, we take all of that information, all of that video, and we're able to bring it back onto shore. We're able to stitch it all together and, like was mentioned previously, create a 3D model of the wreck in its current form. On top of that, to go a little bit further, now with the Boxfish camera, we're able to provide people with the camera to sit behind the computer and watch the video stream live. We're able to give them a 3D map with the photo mosaic to be able to rotate around on their computer as well. And then with this Boxfish, we're actually going to be able to give people the ability to feel as if they're right down next to the wreck, swimming alongside Yoga as we go through. So I'm fascinated to see how the technology has advanced over time, and I'm looking forward to how it advances in the future. But also having this as a good benchmark to continue to add to that, the history of this wreck site and the information we can collect from it.
Yeah, that photogrammetry is going to be really enlightening. I mean, what we're seeing here is a stark contrast and a definite gradient in what we saw when we first approached the wreck, where the wreck was very low relief, relatively low complexity. The parts were very low lying to the sand and covered up with sand. Now we're coming into a much more complex and even mix of low and high relief areas. And we find this on a lot of these wrecks that high relief really does attract a number of fish. We're seeing thousands of tomtates and vermilion snappers. So these are smaller bodies. These are juveniles of that species. We're also seeing those species that Brian Deegan brought up earlier, the white and black stripes that are sort of triangle shaped. Those are jackknife fish. A great number of those. And I can just recall being a scuba diver and trying to do some assessments of these wrecks, running some transects and trying to count the fish along the 30 or 50 meter long transect and just being dizzied by the number of fish there and trying to get accurate counts. And sometimes it can be overwhelming to get accurate counts. You just say 1,000 or 2,000 because you just can't count that fast. But this part of the wreck just seems to be really productive and an interesting habitat component along this wreck feature.
Hey, Chris, I just want to add that I don't think I've ever seen that many jackknife fish. I mean, that's crazy, like how many there are. Usually you just see a group here and there,
really
and that's it.
Yeah, I know that, and they're normally like tucked up underneath things. I mean, I've seen like a school of cuvias that are that maybe that big, but these are just it's like they're everywhere, mixed in with the tomtates and the vermilion.
You know,
there you go. Yeah, look at the school of fish at top. Yeah, that's amazing. Really cool.
You know, it's wonderful to see.
And we have a related question. We have a related question that's come in on the chat. Somebody is wondering why there may be fewer sharks at this particular shipwreck than at wrecks we've seen in the past few days. And we don't fully know the answer to that. That, to me, is one of the great mysteries ecologically, is why sometimes we can go to two different wrecks. One will have hundreds of sharks, usually sand tiger sharks, and the other will have none. And it could be that if tomorrow we came to the Malchace, we might see many more sharks. So we don't fully understand how the sharks are using these sites for their habitats. We know that they're able to eat here, they're able to seek refuge here, they're likely using these wrecks along their migration routes. And so
People keep falling on me, so I can't just like
develop observations like this, we're able to start to put those pieces together. So we don't have a compelling answer for you yet, but really great question.
What I should point out, we're 200 feet on the seafloor, and as we're looking at this environment, and for me, the incredible marine life, I feel like we're in the tropics in about 15 feet of water. So to see this amount of life at 200 feet on this wreck is fantastic. And we talk about sometimes the fish are so thick, it's difficult to see the structure of the shipwreck underneath, and we're starting to encounter some of that here with all of these little fish. I also want to point out, too, we talked about the ship construction, and as we've been talking and moving around, I did see more evidence of the rivets and the rivet patterns that are along the sort of the bracing, the brakeworks, and the frame of the ship. So that's pretty interesting to see. The ship was not welded; it was actually riveted together because it was built in 1920.
So I don't know if we can pan up, but I have on a couple times now. I glanced at what I believe to be a very large hogfish swimming on the edge of the frame every now and then. I thought it might have been a scamp, but I'm pretty sure that is a very large terminal phase hogfish.
It's
Yeah,
huge.
that's at the top of you. You're right, moving from right to left. Yeah. I'm looking for it now. Thanks, ROV, for panning up. Hopefully we'll catch it.
He'll come back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they always circle.
Yep, that's fantastic.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm just amazed at the number of jackknife fish everywhere. Unless these are the same ones just staying in front of us the whole time. That's just a ridiculous number.
It may be
Just ate up with them. Is that what you call it?
Maybe you've heard the ROV pilots. If we keep moving to the right, maybe we get to the end of the vessel and try to determine, are we looking at the bow or the stern? It looks like that might be the bow area. It looks a bit thinner, but that would be pretty interesting to get up there to maybe if we all keep our eye out if we can see an anchor or windlass or any type of that equipment we would expect to see up by the bow.
Also seeing some spotted hogfish too, the purple and yellow tails.
The spot fin, yes.
I believe they're spot
quite a
fin.
few of those. Spot fin, yep.
Yeah, I was holding back on that. I knew I was going to get that one wrong. I was going to say Spanish.
I have not seen a Spanish yet. It's all been spot fin here so far.
And there's a lionfish right now in the middle of the screen, close to the very bottom, near what looks like a chain. And Tani, what is that chain? Can you tell us about that, or what you think, what might have been its purpose?
It's a little bit difficult to tell. It's hard to tell the size at the moment. I mean, is it anchor chain? I'm not quite sure. It's definitely a chain, which is great to see, and so that could be an indicator if there's more of it. That it is the anchor chain, and maybe we should keep an eye out for the vessel's anchors as well, which should be quite large in a vessel of this size, which I believe is almost 400 feet long, if not more.
And Brian, I'm wondering if you can tell us some of
that
the... I was going to say, Brian, some of the spot fin hogfish that we're seeing seem to have slightly different colorations. I'm wondering if you can tell viewers about what that might mean.
So the hogfish you're seeing here, the spot fin. Oh, I've just lost my feed. I don't know if anyone else has.
Oh, it's back.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. The spot fin that I'm seeing, they're are part of a harem, or they're a wrasse species that typically have a terminal phase, kind of adult that kind of holds together a larger group of female spot fins, and he'll protect the harem. He'll kind of hold out on a particular feature, perhaps the feature we're seeing there, and he'll kind of guard it from other terminal phase spot fins that are perhaps maybe further down the wreck. And so you'll see them kind of glide back and forth and kind of corral and keep them together as they move about their area there. So the coloration differences, I can't quite see any in frame now. But you'll see all of them look fairly similar for the spot fin terminal phase or adult male. He'll look, I'm trying to see if I can see him in picture now.
As you're looking, Brian, maybe I could ask the ROV pilots if we're able to turn on the lights a little bit higher if we're done with the boxfish. It might be kind of cool as Brian just described what he sees. If we maybe follow that anchor chain, maybe we could find the anchor attached to that.
I'm guessing another thing in our field to do is some marine debris, some fishing line that seems to be tangled up on that structure right there in the field of view. And I've definitely encountered that a lot. Some entanglement risk for scuba divers and for ROV. There's probably heavy fishing on this site.
Absolutely. And we just saw the adult, the terminal phase built male swim through, and now we've moved away. But he had a bit of white on the front of his face. And the other unique thing is they'll kind of change their body a little bit. They'll have a much higher kind of shoulders, and it'll be a more broader fish. And he stands out a bit more. And the hogfish that I mentioned earlier does this as well. Actually, most of the wrasses that we see will kind of have the same features and same change in their life history. Pretty cool to see, pretty unique, and I'm also staggered by the sheer number of jackknife fish. I can't say that I've ever seen this. There is one site, I think, Paula, I recall us diving off of Wilmington that had quite a few, but nothing like this.
Yeah, I agree. I am starting to see more lionfish now, too. Like, they stand out with the ends of their white, filly fins.
Yeah. The light really makes them pop.
Yeah. You get the search image, too. It's just like, boom, there it is, basketball.
Appreciate it. Yeah, this is looking really nice. We're getting some, we just pointed out, which really kind of floods it out so you can really see the lionfish and all the fish really pop here now, which is great. And maybe with the for the ROV pilots, if we're able to kind of go around the bow a little bit, we've been on one side, but we can rotate, if we're able to do it safely, over to the other to get another glimpse at what appears to be the bow. And maybe as we do, we can see some more of the habitat and more of the fish that are here. And again, we have to remember this is a two-body ROV system, so there's essentially two robots under the water, underneath the ship, that have to coordinate with one another. So sometimes it takes a little bit to adjust, but again, that's because there's actually two ROVs in the water at one time. With the Yogi on the bottom, which is giving us these great views, and Guru above it. It looks like a barracuda swam by there a moment ago.
Hey, Tony, do you think we could get a view of Yogi from Guru in one of the quad feeds in feed 2?
We'll check on that for you. I think stand by for just a moment. We'll see what Roland can do for us. Oh, to show maybe show the view of Yogi from Guru, if that's possible, just to show the ROV underneath it and a bit of the wreck. If we're able to put it on stream 2 for folks. Oh. Hey folks, well, what is it we're seeing under the structure you're about to see? Maybe
like Mr. Nurse Shark.
Napping nurse shark out in there, yeah.
Taking a little siesta.
Right, yeah. You can't see me, I can't see you.
Well, maybe
Still, they're not really that common either. Just thought I'd say, comparatively speaking, not compared to the size, sand tigers.
for the folks at home, why do the nurse sharks do this type of behavior?
Who? Sharpness Puffer.
Well, yeah, I'll take that one, Tony. This is Chris Taylor. So the nurse shark is a benthic or bottom feeding shark, and it's got unlike other sharks that their mouth is at the end of their snout, the nurse shark's its mouth is actually underneath its chin, and it feeds commonly on invertebrates on the bottom, so clams and snails and shellfish. Also eats fish too. At least that's been my experience when it's been in the aquariums. But they can get to be quite large, but they're quite docile. Most often seeing them just resting on the seabed just like that.
There's a great barracuda there. That's wonderful. So it looks like, I think, from the structure that we're seeing here, maybe Joe and Chris chime in, but it looks like we're probably on the bow. Maybe it looks like the hull is a bit sharper here. Again, it is broken up quite a bit. Maybe a testament to the destruction when it went down, but it does maybe appear to be more towards the bow than the stern with the shape of that lower hull.
Well, again, I don't think the destruction is a result of the sinking. If you went down by her stern, something else has happened to this wreck since that's really done a number on it.
And maybe for the ecologists on the line, are we at a good distance from the bottom? Would it help for us to get the ROV a little bit lower for you? How is this view for you?
The view of the fish is excellent. If there's a way to just do a few kind of close-up shots or looks at some of the organisms that are growing on the wreck, that would be really valuable too.
Okay.
And one of the really interesting things that we're seeing is that the fish are using the nooks and crannies or the crevices created by this wreck for their home. Some fish are using the water column above. Some are very intimately tied to the structure. And so it's been really interesting to get peeks of some of the smaller fish, the cryptic species as we call them, and then some of the more charismatic, bigger predators. And Brian, would you be able to share with us a little bit of information about some of these smaller cryptic species, perhaps the puffer in the middle of the screen?
Yeah, so we've got I would call it a cute little fish there, almost center of the screen. Right now he's got his back to us. It's very hard to see, so I'm not surprised we missed him there. But that was a Sharpness Puffer. They only get maybe an inch and a half long. They're typically in pairs when you see them. So when you see this one dart around there, we're following along nicely. Excellent. Usually we see a pair of them when we see them on the bottom. And they kind of stick to one little place, and there's the second one to the left. Excellent. There's our two. So typically, a diver or someone would pretty much swim right by them. I'm surprised, actually, we're not seeing any blennies or gobies or other kind of benthic-oriented fish. We're seeing quite a few tomtates here mingling around the bottom. That's by far probably the single fish that has the most biomass on a lot of artificial reefs and natural wrecks offshore North Carolina. Another fish that actually is not popping out, but maybe due to the depth, is cubbew. That fish was mentioned earlier by Chris. It's another drum species that possibly could be the reason maybe we're seeing so many jackknife. Maybe there's a kind of a handshake agreement where we're going to be in deeper water. The cubbews are a little bit shallower. Perhaps. I'm also kind of noticing there are a few scamp that we've seen, but I'm actually kind of surprised we're not seeing more grouper. I expected to see some more grouper or even some red snapper, American red snapper, on this site. I'm remembering digging in the memory banks, and I recall when we arrived on site on our dive, I was fortunate enough to even see a snowy grouper on this wreck for a brief minute. I also noticed a Kubera snapper, a very large snapper species. But these guys also might be hiding in a lot of these nooks and crannies in the back end of these wrecks that we can't see. Maybe because of the time of day or the current, they could be hiding there. So they could be there, but we're not seeing them.
And so this is fantastic close-up footage. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is a what we call crustose coralline algae. It's the pink and red stuff that you're seeing growing on the wreck structure. And Mike, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about some of the critters that we just saw growing on the structure. I think I saw some coral and some sponges.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Avery. There's a lot of stuff growing on there, believe it or not. It's not just all metal. You pointed out the crustose coralline algae. Thanks for the lights for the ROV pilots. That really makes the pinks pop at these deeper depths. If you were just diving without any lights, it would look very purplish. We're also seeing some ski fans, especially towards the bottom left, right hand of feed 1. There's some sea fans down there. They're a soft coral. They have a fan-like structure. They're made of like a protein. They're not your coral reef forming corals, but they're made of like a proteinaceous, flexible substance. In the shallow water coral reefs, they also exist, but they are much more numerous. Some of the fuzz you're seeing. Oh, there's a nice lionfish in the middle frame. Some of the fuzz you're seeing on the top right is probably a type of hydroid, a stinging type of related to corals, but not super closely. But they do sting if you touch them. Very good shot of that lionfish. Great job, guys. And underneath it, you can really see that crust as coralline algae. Look at that.
And I just want to point out on...
And so, Chris Southerly, we've talked a little bit about how the critters that are the organisms growing on the wreck, we've talked about them from the ecological perspective, but can you tell us what that means from the archaeological perspective? Does that help with preservation, perhaps?
I'm going to say, yeah, Avery, actually, could you repeat the question? I was listening to something else, and if, for those of you looking, feed 2 shows our navigational position with the overlay of the ship and the position of the ROVs relative to the wreck site, too. So
perfect, because I was just asking, we've talked a lot about the ecology and how there's a lot of organisms growing on the wreck structure, and I was hoping you could share from an archaeological perspective what that means. Does that help with preservation of the wreck, for example?
actually it does. As the iron and steel of these ships begins to corrode, it mixes with the seawater and forms a type of calcium carbonate, and iron chlorides form kind of a concrete on the surface, and it encapsulates the metal. And while the metal continues to rust and degrade and fall apart, it slows that process down. So in the process of the corrosion, and then the marine growth covers that, it actually works to preserve parts of the ship, and it's probably one of the reasons it does last so long. So yeah, I had one of the geologists that used to work with us say, he told us concretion is your friend, corrosion is your friend, because it actually slows, it will encapsulate the metal in seawater and slow the degradation process down.
So I should remind people, we are on the shipwreck of the Malchace, World War II freighter that went down in 1942. This is the Valor in the Atlantic Telepresence Project. It's a cooperative agreement between NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries and the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration, or GFOE as they're known. And they're the ones who are bringing this high technology to us. They designed these ROVs. They built them. These are remotely operated vehicles. These underwater robots. They're piloting it, and they're also making the satellite capabilities possible that allows us to stream these images live to you for anywhere you are in the world with about a 6 to 8 second delay. So it's fantastic. And on the line too, we have Chris Southerly, North Carolina Office of State Archaeology. I'm Tane Casserly with NOAA's Monitor National Marine Sanctuary. Chris and I are both maritime archaeologists and historians. We also have Joe Schwartzer on. He's the director of the North Carolina Maritime Museum System, and we have our partners at NCOS, the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science. And Avery, could you introduce the NCOS team to the public that's listening?
Sure. We have a lot of very experienced ecologists on the line who have been diving and studying the shipwrecks off the coast of North Carolina and their marine life that call them home for decades. We have Dr. Chris Taylor. We have Paula Whitfield, Brian Deegan, and Mike Bolinger, as well as me on the line. So I think we have some incredible ecological expertise to illustrate how these shipwrecks form habitat for such an incredibly stunning diversity of marine life that we're seeing here today.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to remind folks, we're actually at 205 feet on the seafloor, You might think we're in a tropical reef in about 15 feet, but this is actually quite deep in the ocean. It's a technical dive for those that are scuba divers. It takes a lot of training. It's a decompression dive, but we're so lucky to have this remotely operated vehicle technology where we can actually sit on the seafloor for hours at a time and help make observations. These shipwrecks are incredibly important historically, archaeologically, but also ecologically, and that's the story that we're bringing to you today. Avery, as we're looking at what looks like part of the hull of the Malchace, looks maybe the side of the vessel, it looks like there's sort of structure. There's some organisms that are growing on it that are red. What are those? Do you know what those are?
So if we could get a little closer, I would be able to make a better ID, but I think what we're looking at, if it's the flat organisms, I think that's the crustose coralline algae that Mike Bolinger was talking about. Mike, can you share a little bit more insight into the crustose coralline algae that we're seeing? And now that we're getting there, I'm wondering if those are flat or if that is something else. It looks like they're moving.
It could be crustose, or it could be type of red algae as well, like a fleshy type of algae as well.
Yeah, you're
or
exactly
sponges.
right.
That one right in the center kind of looks a little bit like a sponge, although it is moving. So yeah, I'm thinking
think the
more
movement
fleshy algae at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And then maybe some hydroids mixed in there.
The whitish ones are probably hydroids. The ones with the blackish, purplish stem might be hydroids, or they might be a type of soft coral. They're
in amongst the algae, we just observed a juvenile wrasse of some sort that was trying to hide underneath some of the algae there. It was a great shot. I don't know if we could capture him again, but he was creeping away there for a second.
I have
and one of the other interesting things is that we don't often see shipwrecks that have macroalgae on them. Oftentimes we see a lot more of these underwater plants on the rocky reefs that are nearby, but every now and again, especially seasonally, now's the time we will see meadows of macroalgae growing on some of the wreck structures. So really neat to see that.
Oh, very nice gag there.
I've got a question.
And we see these wire corals that are that we talked about earlier. They're a type of black coral, like we said, but they're indicative of a very deep reef. They don't grow much. They don't grow a whole lot shallower than 100 feet. I've only ever seen them deeper, between 60 and deeper feet below sea level. So if you see those, you're pretty deep.
I have a question that came in. So we're seeing, fish that are on the wreck site itself, but then there seems to be a whole other layer of fish that are above the wreck site and sort of just free swimming there. Why is there a difference in the two types of or levels of fish on this shipwreck?
Tanya, that is such a lovely question that Chris Taylor is, I think, very eager to answer. So, Chris, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we typically think of the seabed and the structure of the seabed as being the prominent habitat, but the habitat really does extend up into the water column. And all of these fish, and the diversity of fish we're seeing here, all occupy different little parts of the food web. It all depends on what they're wanting to feed upon, and so the fish that we're seeing here, these tomtates and vermilion snapper, these are most tomtates in here, are likely feeding on zooplankton that are in the water column, or smaller invertebrates that are attached to the wreck. But these tomtates can also rise up into the water column and form large schools that can be feeding on plankton that are free swimming, not associated with the wreck, but up in the water column. This barracuda here up in the water column is a voracious predator chasing after probably some of those tomtates when it wants to, and then the albacore and the amberjacks likely are also likewise feeding on some of these smaller pelagic fish. So it really is you've got to consider the habitat here really encompassing from the seabed all the way up to the water column. There's connectivity between all of those different habitats, and we try to understand those linkages when we come here to study these. And the footage that we're getting here is contributing to that study.
There's some quite big fish that are swimming in the distance there. I'm not sure what that is, but it was quite large.
So we have another ecologist, Dr. Brendan Rundy from the Nature Conservancy, who I believe has just hopped on the line. And Brendan, did you see the large fish that Tane mentioned? And if so, did you get a good identification on them?
Hey, Avery, no, I did not get a chance to see that fish. I jumped on the line because there was a third grouper species swimming around, and I was concerned that it might have been a speckled hind, and we would need a good ID on that critically endangered grouper. But we've moved on from that area of the wreck at this point, but maybe we'll catch it later. But thanks for the introduction.
And if you do see that speckled hind, Brendan, please let us know, and we'll try to get a positive identification on it.
Yeah, it's a deeper-bodied grouper, much darker than the gag and the scamp that we've seen so far, and a slightly different shaped tail, not nearly as lunate of a tail.
There's some other things we're seeing here too. What type of fish are we seeing here? They're a bit larger than the other ones we saw.
Brendan, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I'm juggling a couple things here, trying to watch these scamps swim around.
No, we're just...
So that was the question. Can you tell us a little bit more about scamp?
Sure. So we're looking at a couple of scamp grouper right there. Scamp grouper are, as you're observing, a larger bodied grouper, and they're delicious fish, fun to catch. And this is right in their depth range, so they exist not only on these artificial structures, but also on natural bottom in this depth range off of North Carolina. So great to see here on this wreck.
And it looks like we've got quite a large, maybe lionfish, at least it looks large at first, on top of the hull. It's pretty charismatic as well. There's a couple of them.
Yes, and one of the things about lionfish, we've alluded to this, but they're an invasive species in the area. And while Brendan's on the line, Brendan, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about what lionfish eat and what impact that may have on the reef fish that we might see on these sites.
Yeah, absolutely. So lionfish are generalist predators, which means that they'll basically eat anything that's the right size that you put in front of them. So they eat a lot of invertebrates like shrimp and crabs, and they will also consume juvenile finfish. So they might go after some of the small wrasses that we've seen on this wreck, little black sea bass, or if there were any juvenile groupers or things like that out here, lionfish would be chowing down on those as well.
Thanks, Brendan. So, Tani, what section of the wreck are we on right now?
Yeah, Avery, we are on the Malchace. It's a World War II freighter. Went down in 1942, hit by 2 torpedoes. Luckily, with just one loss of life. It was hit by the U-160 on April 9th in 1942. And, when the ship went down and the men abandoned ship, as they were rowing back to shore, they actually saw fires in the distance and an explosion, and it was the tanker Atlas that got hit as well by another U-boat. So it just shows you how active this area was in 1942, being attacked by U-boats. I mean, it's just incredible. And, Joe Schwartzer, I know you guys at the Graveyard at the Atlantic Museum, you're about to launch an exhibit on Battle of the Atlantic, too, that you've been planning for quite a bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We are. We're dealing with the Operation Palkisfire or Operation Drumbeat. When America entered the war against Germany, Dönitz sent over 14 U-boats almost immediately, and they were enormously successful sinking ships from literally from Nova Scotia all the way down into the Gulf. And they took a tremendous toll, so much so that it had serious consequences for the war effort, and easily could have resulted in Britain being starved out. So it was important to get that under control. In this case, there was one fatality. A fireman apparently panicked and jumped overboard. So all the rest of the crew survived, but there was one fatality on the Malchace. And the loss of life overall during this period was just phenomenal. So we're kind of showcasing the different U-boats and the impact and how we responded to that in that part of the Battle of the Atlantic, which is critical.
Yeah, thank you. And North Carolina paid such a high price for that, as well as the U.S. Merchant Marine. So for everybody, when that exhibit is live, please go visit at the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum in Hatteras, North Carolina. And Joe, when do you think that's going to come online for the public?
That should. I think we'll have a formal opening. We're installing it now, but we'll probably have a formal opening later in June, probably around the third week of June.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, so please, everybody listening, go to the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum in Hatteras Village, North Carolina, and learn a little bit more about our nation's maritime heritage. And Avery and Chris, it looks like we've got some fantastic views of some lionfish here.
Yes, we certainly do. There's two beautiful lionfish in the left part of the screen. And I'm wondering if we can get a closer view of the green algae, what I think is green algae, near the lionfish. It's hard to tell what it is, and I'm hoping if we have the opportunity to zoom in, we might be able to get a better identification on it.
Okay. If that's possible, ROV pilots, we just zoom in by those lionfish to see what that green algae is behind them. That'd be great.
So yeah, Tane, Joe mentioned and you mentioned the whole Battle of the Atlantic going on out here. Is like we had there were about 90 ships sank along the North Carolina coast during the conflict.
Absolutely.
Yep, that's about right.
Yeah, people. So with that ratio, that number, that was 78 merchant vessels. So merchant vessels, just like we're seeing here, stopping that life blood, that life flow of materials going over to Europe and Britain to keep them alive. So the Germans knew exactly where to come to start stem that tide of those war material going over to Europe.
Like I say, the fact that when the crew escaping the sinking Malchace, literally saw the flames of the tanker Atlas going down, pretty much the same day in early April, and the wreck we were on just the other day, the E.M. Clark, went down in early March. So all of this is just rapid fire of as the historical accounts, it's like a turkey shoot, just a shooting gallery out here for the German U-boats to prey on U.S. and Allied shipping.
And Avery, I think we're just kind of getting reset. We had a pilot change with the ROVs, so probably have the opportunity now to slowly zoom in there for that green algae for you.
Perfect. And in the center of the screen, it looks like there is some mobile invertebrate, perhaps. It looks kind of worm-like. It's now off to the left of my screen, directly above the lionfish, where the vertical piece of the ship meets the horizontal. I have no idea what that. I can't tell what that is.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's the worm. Thank you.
Are these worms, are they poisonous, Avery?
I believe that's a bristleworm, fireworm. I always mix those up. Is there anybody on the line who may know?
Yeah, this is Brendan. I think that's the dreaded fireworm, which is indeed venomous. Not something that a human wants to touch.
Thank you.
Like I say, that's the rule for any scuba diver, is like we should always be looking and not touching, whether it's the wreck or the marine life on and around it.
That's right. We are actually taking the same ethos with this project. This is a look but don't touch expedition where we're using the ROVs to visually observe the marine life in the shipwrecks, but we're not actually touching the shipwrecks. We're not recovering artifacts, and we're being very respectful to keep our distance, so we don't damage anything on the shipwreck, but also for that marine life too, to sort of get those natural observations without intruding too far into their habitat. Yeah, these are great views. And then maybe for the ROV pilots, I think we're going to be near the boilers, which should be to your left, and that might be an interesting feature to explore or get close to for our audience. Again, we're looking at the lower hull of the World War II freighter Malchace here. And you can see actually that long sort of straight piece in the center of the holder. That's actually the keel of the vessel, which is what helps to keep it stable in the water, so it can track in a straight path, sort of a V-type hull, which helps it to operate in any type of a sea state or the wind. That has been their design feature for literally thousands of years on every kind of craft.
Yep, absolutely.
And here's a great view of the boilers. Wonderful. And then maybe once the ROV pilots gets a little more settled, because we're up above, we can come in a little bit closer and get a really good look at the boilers. I think it'd be interesting archaeologically, but also, maybe we could see what's actually living inside what used to be the fire tubes and things, but now, of course, they're great habitat for all sorts of marine life. And Avery, were you saying those white spirals, that's a type of coral that we're seeing on the boiler?
Yes, so I am no coral expert, but Chris Taylor has done some recon on that particular organism. And Chris, can you tell us what you found out?
Yeah, by all indications from some of the experts that's been able to join this telepresence, it looks like it's a type of black coral or sea whip. And we've seen a good number of them on different features here in different parts of the shipwrecks, similar to the E.M. Clark, where we saw almost meadows of them on the rudder and really no place else on the superstructure of the wreck.
Now, Chris, being that I'm a historian and an archaeologist, I need to ask the question that maybe some folks are asking at home. If that's a black coral, why is it white?
Oh, that's a great question that I do not have an answer for, but I will look that up and maybe share the origins of that common name for this group of coral species.
Maybe some more great views. We can see the rivet patterns here with the boiler. No, Joe Schwartzer, you've been dealing a lot with of course, the North Carolina's maritime heritage, and maybe, you can speak to maybe some of the boilers being some of the only things that are left on shipwrecks, or your experience of finding boilers on shipwrecks, and maybe they've helped identify the vessel at least.
Boilers can help you identify shipwrecks because oftentimes they'll have a manufacturer's plate associated with them, and once you know that, that gives you a good lead to kind of and do the research on the vessel. In this case, the work is so well known and documented that we don't worry about that. But to see the boilers, not only to see them this clearly, but also in this state of preservation, they're in remarkably good shape, all things considered.
Yeah, exactly. They are in fantastic shape. For our ecologists, would you like us to zoom in, or is there anything particular on the boilers you'd like for the ROVs to take a look at for you?
We would love some closer-up images of the possible black corals. Not sure how, and that way we can help get a positive ID.
As you can see, the individual polyps here along that sea whip, as it comes into focus. Yeah, perfect. Great job. Video.
That's beautiful.
So if you could help us, what do the polyps do on the sea whip?
Yeah, so they're the part of the organism that captures food as that is flying by. It could be detritus or plankton or algae or small plants.
Yeah, this is great. And then maybe with the ROVs, we could we could move the ROV just a little bit to the left, and we could actually look inside it, where they should have these large openings, which might be good for the audience too. So lionfish there.
It's interesting you can still see some of the elements of construction of the boiler from the outside, the way in which it was put together. Very interesting.
That's good. And I know from some shipwreck sites we've worked on in the past that we might not be able to find the maker's mark on the boilers, but again, with them usually having such a good state of preservation, you can really get a good idea of what type of boiler it is, and maybe even try to date the time period, which of course would help to date the shipwreck site as well. So they're great indicators that are usually always found on sort of any kind of shipwreck that has an engine with it.
And Tommy, this is a great scene right now to get higher resolution on if we're able to, and some still grabs.
Yeah, maybe for Art, who's our videographer, he's able to highlight these for posterity. And Art is with GFOE, and he's a fantastic videographer, the master of the video and the stills for this project. Oh, these are some great views.
And again, to me, this is just absolutely stunning. It's this unique fusion of the history with the biology and ecology, that these shipwrecks are now forming a home for so many diverse organisms, from animals like the worms that we've seen, corals, other filter feeders, algae, all the way up to small bait fish and large predators like sharks.
All right, and as NOAA, we're so interested in ocean science and ocean conservation. So this is, like you said, Avery, this is a perfect mixing of the historical content, which is so important for us to document, this American heritage, this Allied heritage on the seafloor, but now how its role has changed from what once a transport of war is now, an oasis of life, and how important it is too as a habitat for this marine life is it's incredible to see. And here comes a great view we'll get of the boilers.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see what fish are living inside of those boilers. Oftentimes we'll see smaller blennies and gobies, more protected spaces in the shipwrecks, and we haven't been seeing many of those today.
So hi everyone, this is Dan Rogers with GFOE, back on the call. Tawny's going to step out and grab a quick dinner. As always, delicious food on board. One of the perks of being out at sea.
What is for dinner tonight, Dan? Can you share that?
Fried chicken and barbecue pork ribs, so
Nice.
very good. Yeah, so...
but I think that's a great point, is that this mission has been made possible through an incredible collaboration that includes the officers and crew of the NOAA ship Nancy Foster. Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about the NOAA ship Nancy Foster and its capabilities?
Yeah, the NOAA ship Nancy Foster is actually a repurposed yard torpedo training vessel made originally commissioned by the U.S. Navy. And NOAA took it over in the year, I think it was the year 2000, and then recommissioned it as the NOAA ship Nancy Foster, honoring the legacy of Nancy Foster, who was a prominent member of NOAA through many positions, but most notably the assistant administrator and director for the Office for Coastal Management, which is a huge proponent of the type of work that we're doing right here, the exploration, the characterization, and the outreach, bringing these fantastic features to you. The Nancy Foster is the flagship for the National Ocean Service's science arm, and we conduct over 150 days at sea research to support the needs of our partners, both within NOAA and our federal family, as well as coastal managers. And it's a diverse platform that can accomplish a multitude of tasks. You're seeing a lot of it here on this mission with our ability to map the seabed with the hull-mounted multi-beam echo sounders. We're able to track the currents that allowed us to understand that it was actually safe to get the ROV down to the bottom today. We didn't think that was going to happen, but they have a different type of sensor that can tell us the ocean currents from the surface all the way down to the bottom. They have water column echo sounders that have been telling us the abundance of fish around these wrecks before we